This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control episode number 25. Thank you for joining here today. We go live every Wednesday morning U.S. time on YouTube, as well as all the audio podcast platforms like Google, Spotify, Apple, Pandora, etc. Excited to have a great show for you today. But first, Kyla Cheatham, thanks for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Paris is still on holiday, so it's just you and I today, which is great, which is good. We have a lot to cover, so it's just going to be down to you and I trying to unpack a lot of the stuff that we have to cover here today. So thanks everyone for being here. We've got a great show, 3 main segments as usual that we'll cover today. Later in the show, our special guest is going to be Brad Feakes from a company called Estes Group, and we're going to talk about cloud and managed services and some of the different nuances of making the transition to the cloud. And we're going to go pretty deep into some technical stuff on that, as far as just understanding all the different types of cloud solutions and all the nuances of what it takes to move your applications and data and integration to the cloud. And so we figured it'd be great to have a cloud expert on the show to help us through that conversation. So that's coming up later today in this episode. And then after that, later, even further into the episode, we are going to talk a bit about our top 10 ERP systems for 2022, which is based on a video and ranking that we just launched here just a couple days ago. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the show. So be sure to stick around until the third segment, where we'll talk about those top 10 rankings of ERP systems that you should be considering for 2022. But before we get to that, let's start off this first segment by talking about some very relevant and timely news involving the U.S. government and cloud. Speaking of cloud and their transition to the cloud, and Kyler, maybe you could help us unpack this recent headline story as it relates to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a very significant and relevant to our conversation today. But the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure deal with Microsoft, which has been tied up in the courts for a couple years now, finally fell through. So this deal was a cloud computing contract, and it was kind of a winner-takes-all scenario, which was challenged by other tech giants like Oracle and IBM. And the reason this is significant, as it's a huge setback for the U.S. military, and it's kind of well known that the U.S. here leads in things like weapons development, surveillance technology, but it has really lagged the private sector in the computing realm. So when we look at this, it really showcases the gap that we have in cloud technology just being private sector, when we have it, on our phones right in front of us at all times. But it seems as though the Defense Department, because of this ERP failure, is really lagging behind our overall infrastructure when it comes to the ERP cloud, which I think is something, just the cloud in general, that we'll be talking today with you and Brad and more. And something significant that I learned from this article is that $700 billion a year in taxpayer funding goes to ensure that we have the most advanced capabilities in the world, and how important that is to keep up with other world powers such as China and the artificial intelligence arms race that we're involved in with them. So I thought maybe you would be a great option to kind of take us through understanding this type of monopoly. So basically, we had a few different players here. We had the Defense Department that decided to go with Microsoft for their cloud computing contract, that winner takes all, like we talked about. And then we had Oracle, IBM, and specifically Amazon which is known for being kind of the best of breed in that type of cloud computing industry, challenged that to say it would be an unfair monopoly. So my question for you is that unfair, or how can you kind of take us through in shaving off all the politics, right? In the Jeff Bezos, Trump kind of feud, right? Is that actually an unfair monopoly, or building on that, is that setting them up for failure because they don't have access to these other types of systems and creating that customization? So I thought I might kind of pick your brain as the expert there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess I have a question for you before I answer that, just so I fully understand it. What exactly were they fighting about in court? Was it the fact that it was the whole winner take all concept and being somewhat of a monopoly? That is what was in court?
Yes.
And
yep.
the court
so
rules
they
that
sued on behalf of Amazon, saying that not only did they have no option in the winner takes all, but because of the bias of President Trump and the influence that he had over that, they felt like they weren't given a fair shot at the bid. And then Oracle and IBM just said, we should be allowed to kind of court out these different functionalities and bid for these different parts of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I guess before I answer your question, it's super interesting how these massive cloud contracts are making the news lately. Not just this one, but recently we did a video about Google and how they shifted their all of their cloud applications from, I think it was from Oracle to SAP, because, and the reason is because, and I hope I have this right, I might have it inverted, but I'm 92% sure this is right, that if it's not, it's the other way around. But I'm pretty sure that what they had done is they moved from Oracle to SAP, because SAP would allow them to host SAP in the Google Cloud versus Oracle, which required them to, which kind of limited where they could host their solution. So that was I thought that was a pretty interesting decision or change in direction for a massive company like Google. And so back to your question about this winner takes all and is it fair? I don't know. I guess I have mixed feelings on the fairness of it. I think in this case, obviously there was bias. I mean, I think, being in the U.S. where we're based, and maybe even some of the international audience has heard about, Trump and Jeff Bezos and their dislike for one another and their different political views. Whether or not that should affect a business decision, I would argue probably not. But I think the bigger takeaway or the bigger lesson is maybe not so much is it right or wrong or should it be allowed, but more should any organization that's moving to a cloud solution, should they put all their eggs in one basket, especially a massive organization like the United States Pentagon. And this is true for even Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, larger organizations. The question, kind of evolves or maybe even widens a little bit beyond that from, should a large organization put all of their applications in the same cloud provider? But even further, taking a step further, should a large organization invest all of their applications with one vendor? Should they, give all of the services contract to one big system integrator? And it's not so much a matter of is it right or wrong, or should it be legal or not? I don't know that's it's not necessarily my expertise. But what I argue, and I actually did a video on this recently about ethics. I did a video just last week about ethics in digital transformation and some of the ethical dilemmas that organizations face. And I think one of the ethical dilemmas is that you have, which is also just a business sense sort of dilemma, is when you put all your eggs in one basket, you're inherently giving up a certain amount of control. And you may think you're getting all the leverage because you're making such a big spend and you're so important to that particular vendor. But what ends up happening is they now own you in some ways. They own your applications, they own your data, they own your, where things are hosted. So you're putting it all there, and yes, they're making money off you, but they own it. They decide how things get done, and they, you don't have the flexibility. Whereas if you dissolve some of that, sort of decentralize some of that procurement and diversify, for lack of a better word, you can create some healthy competition. You can diversify in case something goes wrong with one of those vendors, or one of the vendors turns out not to be a good fit. It's not nearly as disruptive if you have to make a change. So I think that's maybe the bigger picture question, not only because I can't fully answer your initial question, but also because I think the average organization is probably more concerned with what does that mean to us and what should we do about it. So I think that's the way to look at it, is like, what is it, how does it help you or hurt you as an organization? And I would argue that it may sound good in theory, but putting all your eggs in one basket can more often than not hurt you in the net, as a net result.
Definitely. And that makes so much sense in going through kind of that due diligence to understand the different vendors and the different options you have. When it comes to, do you know much about the Microsoft versus Amazon when it comes to actually their cloud functionality? I did learn in researching a lot of this that Amazon actually has the highest clearance, security clearance, which was a big deciding factor of why they should be selected, even though Microsoft is working on that when it comes to actual government entities. But I wondered if you knew anything about kind of their capabilities in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I know is that what you said, which is Microsoft Azure, and then Amazon Web Service, or AWS, and now Google. Those seem to be the big three providers. With security, I know Google, I believe there's some security concerns with Google just because it's more of an open platform. But I honestly don't know, as far as security strengths and weaknesses, or who's better at different components of security or cloud pieces. I don't know that there's I don't know of a material difference between Amazon and Microsoft, and maybe some listening might have strong opinions. But that's part of what I want to talk to Brad about later, is just first of all understanding what is it you have to consider, because on the surface, one of the questions I have for Brad later is, on the surface you think, okay, I just need someone that can stand up some servers and put my applications and data in the cloud. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that, and I'm by no means a cloud expert, which is why I'm excited to have Brad on the show, so I can further unpack that and further understand what those different nuances are. So I can't really answer that question for you in any sort of intelligent way, unfortunately.
No worries. Well, maybe our audience will have some thoughts on it, and they'll go ahead and give us some feedback in the comments. But one thing I also found really interesting, it was a lot of this debate and the lawsuits started in 2018 into 2019. And now the project, because technology has progressed, they were going with the single cloud approach, which has really been the core of this overall process and project. And now they're finding that they might need more of a multi-cloud integration. And I'm just wondering, on your expertise, and again, baseline on the cloud side, and this might be something we can kind of dive into with Brad, but when we talk about single versus multi-cloud approach, have you ever seen a project kind of evolve over time to need those different capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen more from a diversification perspective, multi-cloud environments where you might have different cloud providers, or at the very least different instances stood up in different locations, because if you've got a cloud provider that has, locations in, the southeastern United States, for example, which is probably a terrible place to put many cloud solutions because of the hurricanes and stuff down there and some of the physical threats to the infrastructure. But let's just say you had some down there and you had some risk. I've seen other organizations that'll say, we also want to have another instance of the cloud somewhere else, just to diversify. Now, what you ideally would want to do is have, any cloud provider you might engage with who would have a diversified geographic footprint, so that if something were to happen, there'd be enough redundancy, throughout the world. And it's not just physical either. You've also got geopolitical stuff you've got to worry about, and data. Sometimes there could be security issues with a lot of militaries throughout the world. A lot of militaries and a lot of governments throughout the world will require that data resides in certain locations, or will preclude you from hosting data in certain countries. So, for example, in the United States, with tensions between the U.S. and China, the government isn't going to be hosting data in a Chinese data center or a cloud provider. I don't know if it's illegal or not, but that's generally not what they do, just because there's tension between the U.S. and Chinese governments right now. And so, that's just one example, a couple examples, but in general, I've seen that be reason as a way to mitigate risk. As far as the integration points and whether or not there's advantages more from a architecture perspective, that's something that I want to ask Brad about too, because I don't know if there's any specific benefit there. But I think I think of it more from a risk and a diversification perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And huge organizations and understanding how to have even a flexible project strategy, is so important when it comes to these types of implementations, as they can take years, obviously. So last question on this before we kind of go over to Brad and ask him more kind of granular cloud questions is, a lot of people see this as a win for Microsoft, even though they lost the actual contract, but they see it as now they actually are a viable alternative to Amazon. So I wanted to get your opinion on that, because there seems to be two schools of thought around that, to see like just the overall credibility and viability of Microsoft's product in winning this. Do you think that is a huge win for them?
Yeah, I think they've proven that they can be in the same category, as Amazon, and I know plenty of people in the industry that would say they've always been, right up there with AWS, but maybe people just don't think of it in that way, because I think a lot of it is perception. Because I know when I've watched a lot of sporting events or anything that involves data, you'll see like powered by Amazon Web Services, they'll show you some statistics, some sort of statistics from the game or probability of who's going to win based on all the data they're gathering for that particular game you're watching. And it'll be sponsored by Amazon Web Services. So I think Amazon probably does a better job of marketing their cloud solution, and they've certainly built a strong competency. I think I read that that's their most profitable. I could be wrong on this. You're going to want to check me on this, but if it's not the most, it's one of the most profitable parts of their business now, which is really interesting because that's not at all how they started. But they've just amassed so much data and have been such a cloud provider just for their own infrastructure that they've been able to extend that competency to their other organizations. But at the same time, Microsoft has been doing this a long time too. And I think they've been sort of flying under the radar, not as much marketing behind it necessarily, although it's very well known as a very credible provider. And then, like I said, now even Google is providing a lot of cloud services for some pretty large organizations throughout the world. So the good news is you have options. Whether or not one's better than the other, I couldn't tell you. It just depends on what your needs are. But I think those are three really good options. And what I want to dive into with Brad is, do you have to go with one of those three options? That's what I'm even more fascinated by, is are there other second or third tier smaller providers that could give you better service, better solution, more attention, whatever the case may be?
Absolutely. I think that's so important, especially for just normal sized companies, right? It can be very intimidating to work with these kind of titans of the overall industry. So excited to hear from them. Just so our audience knows, we do have the Google SAP migration blog up on our website. As Eric said, we have some videos on it too. So please feel free to go ahead and check those out if you're interested in kind of more of this current events when it comes to the big tech industry and cloud.
Yeah, and you made a great suggestion earlier that I'll repeat to the audience, is if you're watching this on YouTube or another platform where you can leave comments, just let us know if you have a strong opinion or strong perception of Google, AWS, Amazon, and Microsoft Azure. If you have any strong opinions or thoughts, I'd love to hear your comments. So be sure to leave those comments if you've got them. So be curious to hear the audience feedback on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you have specific questions, we're super active in our social listening to make sure that we're, tailoring our content to what our audience wants to hear. So we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the meantime, I'm excited to have Brad on. We're going to bring him on right after a quick break. We'll bring on Brad Feakes from Estes Group. I almost said Estes Park, but they're based out of Estes Park, Colorado, which is a small little mountain town outside of Colorado, for those that don't know that. But it's called Estes Group. They're a managed services provider, and he's a cloud and managed service expert. So I'm going to ask him a lot more detailed questions. I think they'll answer some of these questions you brought up, Kyler. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and we are talking so far in this episode about cloud solutions. And we talked a little bit about the U.S. Pentagon and how they had recently won a lawsuit involving cloud solutions. And we primarily talked about the really big cloud providers. And what I wanted to do, and the reason I wanted to have Brad on the show, was to talk more about just cloud in general, but also understand what your options are when it comes to cloud solutions, because there's some really big behemoths out there that everyone knows of, but there's also a lot of really good second and third tier providers that can be viable options as well. So we want to just really talk about what the options are and just some of the things you should be thinking about as you're evaluating potential cloud providers. So I'm excited to bring Brad on the show. Brad, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So I guess just to start, maybe give us a quick intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Estes Group, if you don't mind.
Sure. You bet. So Estes Group, we've been around going on 20 years now, headquartered out of Colorado with kind of a America-wide footprint. We started off focusing generally on ERP implementation and that whole kind of space inside of there. And as we got deeper into it, we moved more and more towards what you might call the managed services side of the IT platform, understanding the need that ERP implementations have a real technology component to them, and that customers were coming to us not only looking for best practices in terms of how to get MRP running, but also in terms of how to set up and install an application successfully, how to deploy it successfully. And as the cloud has continued to grow, we found ourselves moving into the area of cloud deployment as it relates to ERP. And that's really become kind of an area for us that's become especially intriguing. Now, myself, I've been with the Estes Group now for 8 years. And I've kind of lived through that transformation internally, coming from the customer field in the ERP community and working into now more with a bigger concern towards the managed services and the cloud deployment aspect of the business.
Great. Yeah, it's a great area to be in. That definitely is where the industry and the needle is moving, is much more toward the cloud than on premise recently.
So it really is. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. I didn't want to interrupt you there.
I was just finding that the need for that idea of going beyond our existing parameters, our existing network boundaries, has really been a subject that customers are coming to us to understand more and more, as their own IT staff seems to be less and less interested in maintaining those old boxes.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for organizations to outsource the whole IT support function and getting out of the business of software development and software maintenance and all that good stuff, and letting the experts take care of that while they run their businesses.
Right.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I guess to start, maybe just to set some context, maybe help us understand, what the cloud is, because I think, conceptually, I think a lot of us understand just generally the cloud is offsite, someone else handling our technology, the data and everything, software data, infrastructure, it's all out there in the cloud, versus on-premise where we install it, we've got the servers here on site. So I think conceptually at a really high level, most of us understand that differentiation, but there's a lot more to it. And just chatting with you earlier this week to prepare for this discussion, you actually helped me better understand some of the nuances of all these little differences, or the little subsections of what the cloud really is. So maybe just help us unpack the cloud in general. What does it mean? What are the major components of it?
For sure. So I think I love the bumper sticker that says we all got excited about the cloud, but it was just someone else's computer. And I always find that in the end just my favorite little quip when it comes to cloud conversation. But for me, the cloud is best understood to me using those old as a service definitions that we all went through when we were doing Management of Information Services 101 in college. And for me, I'm a Euclidean, so I think everything in life can be summarized by a straight line. So if you take kind of the dimensions of an application deployment, and on the one side you have your traditional on-premise deployment. You have a local server, you have a local installation, you have the data center, you have the cooling, the hardware, all of the infrastructure to make sure that this thing runs successfully, redundant power, physical security, etc. That's kind of on the one dimension of a computer deployment. On the far end, you have what we call software as a service. And software as a service is kind of your purest version of what we might call cloud. And that is where there is no install, that from a software owner standpoint, you as the recipient of the software have no visibility to the installation and the final product of how that software lives. You just consume the output. Now, between that, there are a lot of kind of variations that differ in varying ways. So as we go kind of from the on-premise towards pure SaaS, you run into what sometimes is called infrastructure as a service. And in this case, with infrastructure of a service, you have a cloud provider, a data center, or what have you, providing the tools to allow you to carve out virtualized servers inside of their data center. So they have a whole bunch of server stacks. They have that all built out. What they have on top of that is this software layer that allows you to virtualize and scope out, scale out the server architecture you need to do your install. So from an installation standpoint, you still have what we call a perpetual license of the software. You are still installing it on a box or a set of boxes that you have physical control of. You can define and control the properties of those servers, which is one of the big pieces of cloud, right? Elasticity and scalability. You say how much RAM you need, the number of cores, etc., on a given box. And you have kind of that full control, but you also have the responsibility of everything else other than that physical manifestation. As you move a little further out, we talk about platform as a service. And with platform as a service, it often happens where you have someone who's kind of playing the middleman. They're consuming those raw cloud resources from the data center, and they are scaling and scoping out that work for the end customer in terms of building out the environments, and then optionally installing and managing the software itself that goes on those environments. So from a customer standpoint, you have less responsibility to keep the overall ecosystem running. You still have access to that back end of the server to be able to see your data or see your application and manage some of that. But you also have kind of a partner working with you to assist you in that area. Now, Estes, that's kind of the area for us and where we have the most footprint and visibility. We work kind of between that level of infrastructure and platform as a service, kind of work with our customers to give different variants of that. It's when you get from platform as a service and now you go further down the dimensions, now you're talking about pure software as a service. So at this point, the customer no longer has visibility to that server foundation. They're just really consuming that software from a pure client standpoint. And it's really that kind of dimension is where when we talk about cloud, anytime you stop living on an on-premise server, you're working with some version of the cloud. And depending on kind of the needs of the business and how you best work with the tools at hand, you might choose one or more versions of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's helpful to think of it in a continuum, like the way you just laid it out. And I think one of the big things that resonates with me as you're talking about this is the fact that there's still a lot of holdouts for the cloud. A lot of CIOs and IT directors that they like the control they have, they like the transparency, the visibility, the ownership, whatever you want to call it. They like just knowing they've got their own stack, they've got their technology, the data, it's all right there. They can, for better or for worse, they control it. And I think a lot of companies are afraid to make that huge leap over to SaaS, on the other extreme where it's just not only in the cloud, but it's multi-tenant and you have less flexibility. You don't really see what's happening behind the scenes. But what you're saying is there are some hybrid, they're not really hybrid options, but there's things that aren't as extreme of a jump for some of those companies that do want to retain control and maybe have more flexibility. Is that true? Would you
For
agree
sure.
with that?
Yes.
More options?
Yeah, entirely. There are some gradients along the way that a company who doesn't want to commit completely to a SaaS option for one of a number of reasons, and there are reasons that are your classical change management reasons that are just difficult to handle the change. There are also, I think, in my mind, more legitimate reasons that keep a company from moving straight into a pure SaaS version. But to your point, there are different gradients between the infrastructure and platform as a service models that allow you to take away some of the capital investment costs, some of the risks, some of those challenges that come from a pure on-site, on-premise server, and start to consume the cloud in varying ways to help make your business better and make your bottom line better as well. So those are definitely some areas that, and when we had discussed earlier, the idea of an ERP system quite often is much more of a tangled web than when we talk about it academically. We say an ERP is this thing, where in reality it is a core system with a number of bolt-ons, integrations, reporting tools, other things that are hooking into a given platform. And the challenge with a implementation and a cloud deployment is quite often you're not just moving the ERP system, you're moving the ERP system and repointing or moving all of the other components to that. So I think of a company's IT platform as like an octopus, where you have 8 legs, and some of those legs are stuck back in an on-premise model. Some of those legs are already into the SaaS model. And as you migrate your ERP software, you want to make sure that you don't cut off any of those legs along the process. And with a IaaS or a platform as a service model, you have the ability to do some of that migration without it being as disruptive for the business.
Yeah, that's a good point. Great point. Do you find that, given the maturity level or lack thereof of some cloud ERP systems in the market or enterprise technologies in general, do you find that a majority of organizations are doing some sort of mix where it's some stuff in the cloud, but you're still trying to figure out how to tie it back to or integrate back to on-prem systems and tie it all together? Is that the more common scenario, or are you finding that more companies are actually putting everything, all their core systems in the cloud?
It probably depends on where a given company is with its business system and how tangled its existing web is. That's probably one factor. Probably the level of complexity within the business is another driving factor. If you are, let's say, a discrete manufacturer with a really well-developed and well-defined product and a relatively straight business model, you are a much more likely candidate to move straight into a SaaS solution. Where you can use those functionalities and take them on and do well with it. And I've seen a lot of companies who do that and they're successful. There's another kind of class of companies that have more complex product, more complex business models, bigger challenges coming from the dealer networks or the supplier networks, the subcontractor networks, and a need for functionality that tends to stray from out of the box capabilities more commonly. And that's the class of companies where I find the middle models of IaaS or PaaS being more valuable to them, because it gives them that ability to maintain some of those competitive edges that they've developed over the years with their ERP system. Some of those things are not things that are easily ported over into a pure SaaS model. I listened to a CEO of a company once describe kind of their future vision for the world, and he described it as kind of a balance between configurability and customizability. And for those customers with the simple product, the simple business model, they were the most likely the ones that could live within a configurable system that had very well prescribed boundaries. And for those customers who did not live within that system, there was the more perpetual license on-premise version of that installation that would allow them that greater flexibility. And then the benefits of these middle cloud versions is that you have the on-premise capabilities of the system, but you also have the deployment of the cloud. So it's kind of taking the best of those two sides of the coin and trying to blend them that way.
Yeah. So just to maybe summarize the whole enterprise technology cloud landscape, you have, tying it back to your description of what the cloud is and some of those different options you have in the cloud. So on the one extreme, you're talking with the software as a service, multi-tenant, everything sort of managed by the software vendor, and a little less flexibility that goes along with that. So examples of products that fit that model would be like a NetSuite or a Workday, Salesforce, like some of those pure SaaS solutions, right? And then you might have like a, SAP, Oracle, Epicor, Sage, those sorts of products where maybe you buy an instance of the software, but you have someone else hosting it, either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. Is that how you would, like, how would you, if I were to go buy software, and I sort of that hybrid model where I'm actually buying my own licenses, I'm not doing a multi-tenant model like a NetSuite where you just, you're logging in, you're using the same, version or whatever as everyone else, and you can't really or you have limitations on what you can customize. So you back off of that, and then you go with like a Epicor, let's just say, or SAP, whatever it is, and you want to have someone else host it. Tell us, like, how does that work? What does that look like?
Right. So the deployment model is one of those kind of magical parameters within the idea of software selection that doesn't always get considered. And I think it's always something that really should be considered. Let me just drop into an anecdote here of a customer who had brought in the Estes Group to help them install and implement the system. And on kickoff day, the IT director says, "So where's our web client? How do we deploy this to the web so our users can get at the application?" And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, it's actually a fat client deployment. The application doesn't have a robust web client that can support this implementation. And he kind of stood up in awe of, oh, how did we not know this? And it was one of those assumptions that we take on when we look at software selection. We think so much about functionality. What are the key things that the system can do for me? Can it configure my product? Can it handle my supplier structure? Can it handle customer requests coming in? We don't always think of how is the system going to get deployed? Will we have the access we need to be able to report and fine tune and do whatever else we need? And how will the users be consuming that? So that's a big kind of chunk of that. Now within the broader ERP landscape, like you said, there are software providers like NetSuite, like Plex, Salesforce, what have you, where it's really what you see is what you get. And you have this cloud version, this SaaS version, and it's really your deployment is self-evident. It's all browser based. So those things are all made very clear for you. As you deviate out of those classes of applications, it gets a little more dicey because you have a lot of providers who are kind of in a middle ground between some form of a web client and some version of an on-premise client. I would say a couple off the cuff would be SysPro or Epicor would probably fall into that category where they have a SaaS version and they have a on-premise version, and they're running in a parallel model. So as a consumer, as a buyer, you need to be determining, between the two of those to say, yeah, am I going to look and go in this direction of the on-premise version, or is the SaaS version capable enough to meet my needs? So it's with that family of companies that are kind of that predated cloud, predated SaaS, that really have that conundrum of how to kind of bring their platforms forward without losing all that robust functionality that they built in the process.
All right, great discussion so far. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more in our discussion with Brad talking about cloud and managed services. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 25. Thanks for being here today. You can find us every Wednesday on YouTube, all the audio podcast platforms like Spotify, Google, Amazon, etc. And we're here talking with Brad Feakes from Estes Group about cloud and managed services. So let's pick up the conversation where we left off. This gets back to hosting providers. So if I just back up and I think like a consumer, like a CIO or a potential organization that may potentially move to the cloud, it seems like the big names, like it seems like if you're going to move to the cloud and you're talking to an ERP vendor that's not SaaS, let's just say it's like SAP or Oracle or Sage or Epic or whoever it is, and you want to, you're looking for a cloud solution. A lot of times it seems like the market will tell you or suggest that your options are somewhat limited. You can either have the vendor provide the hosting services, or they might have a partner like Azure or Amazon Web Services that does all their hosting for them. Obviously, Estes Group, the company you work for, is in the same space. Tell us how you guys compare yourself, or kind of how a mid-tier option like an Estes that isn't necessarily an Amazon. How do you guys fit in the space, and kind of what's your value proposition as it relates to other hosting providers?
Oh, that makes good sense. And so there's the kind of pure from a infrastructure as a service standpoint. You have customers who are looking to consume Amazon or Azure and use that directly as their source for carving out resources, and building out their own system. And that's kind of sometimes how it gets framed up to the customers. It's either you can work through the vendor and have the vendor host that for you, or you can work through a big data center and work there and do that work. Now, what the challenge for a lot of companies has to do with, I don't have the resources internally to manage that environment. And what doesn't always get understood is that there's a kind of a middle ground for that. And that's where the Estes Group has been kind of targeting our work. And that is where we're working as kind of a middleman between the cloud provider and the consumer to build out that environment for them, and kind of work in the place of the customer to build out an environment that meets their needs performance-wise, scalability-wise, and then work with the cloud provider to make sure that we're getting the best cost that we can pass along to the customer, but also getting all the necessary resources to keep that system running. Make sure that we're picking a provider that has the appropriate like ITAR certification or CMMC if there are like compliance issues, but also working with a provider that has really good no downtime and reliability, because data centers, in spite of their notoriety, are sometimes notorious for some of the outages, and those outages are pretty widespread and really hit a business. So making sure that we're working with a provider that has that reliability in terms of their company and their provisions of services is really important. So we step in, we take those resources, we install, we manage, and then we work with the customer to define, now, how much control do you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, want of this application, this environment? And then we scale our pricing model and our relationship with them accordingly. And I think that's really, if you're a customer looking to go into the cloud, those are questions you should be asking yourself and your provider. How much control do I want? How many services or assistance do I want? And what am I exactly paying for? Because in the cloud, one of the best spaces, or one of the best aspects of this space, is that elastic computing, Moore's Law. You've probably heard the term. Moore's Law has become one of those drinking games. Everybody takes a shot whenever someone in a webinar like this mentions it. But the reality of Moore's Law is that processing power is going up. And because of that, it's going up faster than the needs of the software. So costs should be coming down. And so you want to make sure that when you're working with a provider that you're understanding, what does that cost model look like? We have some customers who have cyclical business needs, where come the busy season, let's say they're driving ready to get everything for September 1 because the kids got to be in school, and their computing needs will spike similarly. And then when they hit winter, those computing needs will drop. So we work out with some customers, is there a cyclical business cycle that we can work out, that you can dial up our resources allocated to us during this period, and then dial them down and have the cost model run accordingly. So that's some of the flexibility you get in this kind of private cloud architecture that's, I think, really beneficial for customers.
Right. Yeah, that makes good sense. Now, what about when we're looking at the cloud in general? There's a few different aspects of it. I mean, there's the hosting itself, and I think that seems like the most fundamental thing is I'm looking for someone to host my software. And obviously, you've already talked about the infrastructure aspect of it, the platform piece of it. But let's dive into some other areas or some of the other benefits of cloud. When you look at, or maybe not necessarily benefits. You'll probably tell us there's benefits, but I guess just more how it's addressed in the cloud. So when you look at something like data management, I mean, how does data? We look at the whole bucket of data and analytics, business intelligence, all that stuff. How does the cloud enable that, or how does it work differently in the cloud versus if I'm managing that stuff on premise?
So if you're managing it in the cloud, one big benefit then, of course, is access. You want to be able, as a customer, quite often to access your data and consume it in whatever way you need. If you're in a pure SaaS environment, sometimes that gets to be challenging. You're either setting up some API to perform replication, or you're kind of working through the solutions of the SaaS provider to get access to data, which can be a little clunky at times. When you're in a pure model where you have direct access, your options become pretty significant in terms of what you can or can't do. What I've seen a lot of, this is where I think hybrid clouds and the discussion of different levels of integration become really commonplace, where you have third parties that might be needing to get access to your data. In a cloud environment, you have a nice amount of control to be able to define which ports you're going to open, what APIs you're going to allow, how you're going to allow other applications either internally to your own subnet or outside to the outside world to come in, extract data, and work back and forth. It's pretty common in this structure to have, I would say, a fair bit of localized reporting requirements, because I say those tend to be a little easier on customers from a overhead and cost standpoint. So it's very common to see replication through the business analytics tool like Microsoft, or the similar tools that are reporting against them, as well as even things as simple as crystal reports or what have you. There's a fair bit of work that can be done across multiple platforms to be presenting data back to the end users.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And what about cybersecurity? A lot of organizations are, with all that's going on in the world right now with cybersecurity breaches and whatnot. There's two schools of thought. It seems like you've got some that would argue that cloud's going to be more secure because you have professionals that are going to have minimum criteria, security criteria, best in class security controls and whatnot. Then you have another school of thought that says, well, I want control, back to the control issue. I want control. I want to know what's happening with my data and the security and all that stuff. How does cybersecurity factor into cloud, and how does cloud enable better cybersecurity?
And it's a really good question, and I think one that people should be asking when they're kicking the tires. If I'm putting this in a cloud, am I painting a target on myself? I know customers come to us asking that question. Am I making myself more vulnerable or less? And there are certainly a number of factors here. Let me give you another anecdote. I seem to speak better when I'm talking about a specific example, but the idea of cybersecurity as it relates to ERP, quite often we think of those as very separate things. I had a customer that was going live on an ERP system, and the entire business, it was on-premise. They had their own IT staff. They had their own application management staff. And the whole business was focused on cutover weekend, getting ready to go live on this ERP system. And it just so happens that some hackers were targeting that same time period, because over cutover weekend, they got themselves hacked and ransomed. So the entire environment, the entire ecosystem, their ERP system, and pretty much everything else went down all at once. And they literally went dark on us. We were to the point where we were speaking to their IT director over his Gmail account, and he was communicating us over his phone, because it was the only device in the building that hadn't been compromised. And sometimes I think of security. There's one benefit that I like about the apportionment of servers into the cloud, is that you get kind of a segregation of duties effect that comes from saying this computer is only going to be used for these purposes. And I know, coming from a customer environment where we had a big data center and a lot of blades, you tend to multi-purpose things, and it gets easier and easier to treat a server to serve multiple functions. And you say, okay, well, can I have this? Can I put a file server on here so that it can connect to my CNC machines? And suddenly you've opened up what often is a big vulnerability when you start connecting stuff to shop floor devices, because there's some some risk to be had there. So that segregation of duties is one way I think where security gets to be really helpful in the cloud, because we tend to apportion servers to do very specific functions and not to extend beyond those. The other piece I like about the cloud when it comes to security is the fact that you're kind of how do we say it? Was it New said he was sitting on the shoulders of giants? When you're working with a data provider, a data center provider, you're working on the platform that they've developed, and they themselves have bomb shelter level facilities that they've built up to secure, that have redundant power, that have extra cooling, all the things needed to keep a system safe and protected, and have all their own security stack layered on top of that at a software level, so that at a software application level, you have an initial layer of security that you're building on top of. Now, as a managed service provider, you have the ability to layer on top of that kind of a best-in-class security suite of endpoint security management and local and web-based management to try and connect, monitor your servers, monitor your behavior of your servers internally so that you can watch that, and also keep everything segregated so that you can, if you ever run into a situation where something looks strange on one device, you can isolate, you can fence in that device very quickly and go in and look at it without affecting the rest of the ecosystem. So I think there's some benefits there, like economies of scales that come from being able to take a best-in-class security solution and lay it over your entire ecosystem of customers.
Yeah, makes total sense. And one thing I'll advise clients on, or our team will advise clients on, is that if you're worried about having a bullseye on you because you've got your data and systems in the cloud, one way to think about that risk is who's more likely to have more seasoned and tighter controls, or security protocols that are going to protect the data. I mean, a cloud provider like Estes, you guys have a lot to lose if you have a breach. You have a lot. That's your whole business, and your job. That's your only job. That's what you specialize in, is providing these cloud platforms and environments and secure cloud environments. Whereas the average IT shop for an internal organization just isn't going to have that level of sophistication and best-in-class security tools and whatnot. So I always use that as a sort of a counterpoint to people that say, well, I don't want to be exposed because someone else has my data or someone else has my systems in the cloud. So I think it's a good point.
It really is.
What about
the customer? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I just say I'm really a believer in no single solution applies to everyone. And we come into some cases where we see a customer and they have a really best-in-class IT structure. They've followed one of those best-in-class compliance models of this is how we're going to structure our support, so that we have help desk people worrying about help desk issues, and we have network admins and architects worrying about the architecture, and you're able to build out a sufficient structure to manage that full time. We're not going out there to try and say, oh yeah, you need to gut that system and move it if you have a successful staff and a successful business process internally. If you're one of those folks who has the network admin who is always driving in four directions, fixing an end user terminal on one day, putting together terminal services on the next, and supposed to check security messages in the evening, you have one of those cases where you might be wanting to look to apportion some of those duties to the cloud. I think that's an area where you can better focus your people internally and give them a few fewer responsibilities to try and burden, while you kind of take this and you apportion that out into a cloud environment.
Yeah, it makes total sense. What about the speed of cloud versus on-premise? I know I was actually chatting with a client this morning, a new client that's moving off of some old AS400 applications, and they were talking about how one of the challenges or the hard parts of moving off an AS400 environment is that it's so reliable and the performance is so great, and they're worried about then going to a cloud environment where maybe it's not quite as stable or not quite as reliable. But how would you compare? So there's a mindset amongst a certain subset of the market that cloud can't be as reliable, can't be as fast, or whatever. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, just how does cloud affect speed and performance overall for your applications and your systems?
Well, I see kind of both. I see both sides of the spectrum often with my customers. I see customers, and this is even at an ERP level before you've even discussed cloud. The movement of from a black screen plain old C-based application where you enter a couple of fields into a green screen, you hit enter, and boom, 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 all this stuff happens. Moving from that to a multi-tiered client server architecture like an Epicor or like a Sage. The expectation management is necessary there, just from an application standpoint. The idea is the goal of these systems is to reduce time across the value stream and not necessarily make each individual's life more efficient. So that's a check that we try to have in terms of the expectation management. It says, yes, Mr. Purchasing Agent, when you hit the button, you may have an extra quarter second of latency, but that time is spent in providing greater value to the rest of the value stream. So that's one piece that you kind of layer out there, because it can be very easy to conflate the challenges of application migration and the architecture migration. Now, when we work with a customer to determine how they want to deploy their applications, the ability to have secure and robust access to the outside world in terms of your internet access is certainly an important consideration. And we run into situations where we'll be working with a factory that is next to a railroad track, and because of such, they don't have a good pipe coming in. They only have, they might be beaming off their cousin's network or something, doing something goofy to try to get internet inside of the building. And the legitimate infrastructure of the local community prevents them from having that robust connection that would say, we're going to steer you down the road to a low on-premise install, because really this is going to be the best choice for you. Now, as technology options increase, some of that changes a little bit. I have StarNet or Starlink on my own home because I live out in the sticks. And as that continues to improve, I'm seeing personally some of the benefits that you can see. So that there are different options out there as time progresses. But we were working with another customer just recently and doing some ping tests to see how quickly they could get out to our data center versus get into their own network. And we were finding that the data center pings were actually coming back quicker because the connections were well defined and kind of best of breed, because once you got into their outside network, the architecture was at such a better level that the ability to move things through all the switches and gears was much faster than they had internally. So yeah, you could bring that local infrastructure up to speed, but that's where your capital investment becomes a concern. And is that really where you want to be going? So I think speed is always a concern and a consideration, but I've seen in a lot of cases our customers are happy with the speed that they get because you have the economies of scale that come from these data centers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it in the way you just framed it, as far as just getting out of the myopic view of speed. How fast is it? Oh, it's not fast enough, then therefore it's not a good fit. It's easy to fall into that sort of myopic assessment of cloud. But if you look at it from the overall value chain perspective, and as long as the performance and speed is, a minimum level of acceptable speed, then,
right.
It doesn't matter if that doesn't really matter if that quarter second, delay from the time you hit enter until it, the transaction is completed. I think that's a good point. Now, I do, just as a counterpoint to that, I actually was talking to a lot of the work we do at Third Stage is expert witness type of work. And we were actually talking to an attorney client of ours for an expert witness case. And one of the facts of the case is it involves a SaaS software provider that had provided and implemented their solution. And one of the things that they had found is that it wasn't a split second. It was more like a 6 to 8 second delay, from the time a transaction was completed. And that was, multiply that times however many hundreds or thousands of transactions that this particular company has. And that was, creating a big slowdown in their operation. So do you see that with, is there, are you more likely to have that kind of a performance issue with like a SaaS provider, multi-tenant, because it's, the servers get jammed with all the transactions they're doing, or is there any difference, or is it just a matter of having a better infrastructure provider that can, provide better performance?
That's a really good question, and I wouldn't want to answer for the SaaS people in terms of how they're doing their architecture. I don't think that would be fair of me, but I do always, it's a challenge in multi-tenant environments, and we offer versions of multi-tenancy, and the challenge of multi-tenancy always has to do beyond security, right? If you have security needs where ITAR mandates that you lock things down, you don't share resources, that's one thing, but beyond that, a multi-tenancy environment, even if you're doing something where you're sharing the SQL Server box, let's say, between applications, that can draw less investment on your point, but you do understand that you are sharing resources across a collection of individuals. And if you're truly looking for a certain dedicated performance, you do need to figure out how much that's worth it to you and whether or not you want to apportion that accordingly. Because I think there's definitely a challenge for scaling your resources appropriately to meet your load and to make sure that you have visibility to whether or not that's being scaled properly. For us, that's kind of one of the benefits we like to work with our customers, is that they have visibility to that. We give people line of sight to understand, this is where the CPUs are pegging, or this is how much RAM you're consuming, or this is how much data is coming into the SQL server, to say, okay, we think that you've hit a level here now, your transaction loads justifies additional increases in resources. And that's where the cloud benefits show themselves, is that you can dial those things up when you need them to. But I think really the conversation between customer and provider needs to be open, so that as they feel that pain, you're giving them good answers to the questions. Because the idea of the cloud is just a black box from which no other information comes out is a real scary conundrum for a customer.
Yeah. All right, great discussion so far. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more in our discussion with Brad talking about cloud and managed services. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 25. Thanks for being here today. You can find us every Wednesday on YouTube, all the audio podcast platforms like Spotify, Google, Amazon, etc. And we're here talking with Brad Feakes from Estes Group about cloud and managed services. So let's pick up the conversation where we left off. What about when you look at the transition to the cloud? So say I'm an organization, I'm the CEO or CIO of an organization, and I've got a pretty well-entrenched, well-established, mature IT team. I've got an IT infrastructure. I'm used, for better or for worse, I'm used to having all my, my infrastructure housed in my four walls. What does that transition look like? I mean, how, just from a organizational perspective, but also from a technical perspective, how difficult is that for companies to give that up and to make the jump, and to, it's probably not as easy as it sounds.
Sure.
How do you see the client?
Well, I would say the idea there is you talk a lot about change management. I really think a lot of it has to do with change management. One of the kind of pillars of change management is open communication of what the current versus the future state looks like. To say, okay, currently we're doing this and we're seeing things this way and we're processing things in this way. In the future, these are the differences, and make those differences real apparent for people. Because I think when change happens, quite often the biggest shock is not that the change happened, but that I wasn't aware, that I did not plan for that change to happen, that I didn't realize that on Monday I would be accessing the system in a different way than I was on Friday. So one of the biggest pieces of what we do is rolling out that change to understand these are the implications. Now, the easiest way to do this is through test environments. And as part of a migration to a system, we first spin up the environment. We get a ecosystem put together where we can connect them to the application server through, let's assume it's a terminal services farm that they're coming into and they're going to access through a terminal services farm. They get used to that idea and they're like, well, in the old days, I had a local client install and I connected there and I had the look and feel of a client install. Well, now if we're going to be in a terminal services farm, this is what it's going to look like. Instead, these are the differences you're going to see when you need to get a downloaded file. You go here instead of there. And because of these things, we can offer these benefits. Because that's using the terminal services example, fat client architectures tend to be pretty fat in terms of the amount of data, the amount of chattiness they have when they're talking to the application server. So you have client to the app server tends to be pretty chatty with a lot of applications. You move that to a terminal services farm that's inside of the network. Now you're just speaking to this essentially dumb terminal, and all the heavy lifting is happening in very short distances inside, so that your final performance might be something that's better than your current state, and trying to help people understand these are the implications, these are the benefits, this is why we're doing it, is really an important piece of that whole testing cycle as you verify that all the pieces of this cloud architecture are going to work for you in the future.
Yeah. Great point. And one of the things that you had mentioned the other day when you and I spoke about this stuff, getting ready for this discussion, you had talked about, I think you were talking about manufacturing and distribution companies in particular, but you were talking about how different industries have different business processes and different workflows required within their applications and their data flows and things like that. And one thing that I didn't know and I didn't fully understand until you sort of explained it to me was that, that the type of industry you're in and the understanding of the industry is very important when establishing a cloud infrastructure, because it's not as simple as just put it in the black box, to use your words, just throw it out there in the cloud, and how hard can it be? So tell us how the industry nuances, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, or whatever example you want to give, how does that affect how you set up your cloud environment?
Yeah, it does have a big effect on the overall service model that we work to provide for ourselves, is because we're coming from a kind of a functional into a technical realm. As we ramped up our technical folks and brought in more people to handle the speeds and feeds, we kept them tightly integrated with our consultant and application management level people, so that we could bring in those two pieces to help manage the application. Because in my mind, platform as a service definitely has a component of application management that bleeds into technical management. And so understanding in an MRP environment or a manufacturing environment, I have nightly processes that are running inside of the system. Those processes have a technical component in terms of the lag they have on the server and the database, and also an end user component in terms of this is what I want to see coming out the backside. As a consultancy that does hosting, we try to keep that blended to understand these are the potential areas, the pain points that you're going to see when you install a server. And that's where we've had folks come to us kind of from the mom and pop MSP world, where they knew someone, cousin Ned could throw my application up in an ERP, but once it was up there, he didn't know what to do with it. So we couldn't figure out how to get SSRS running in a way that was helpful to manage our business. Or we were an engineering firm, and you take a lot of manufacturing in America is very configurable and thus very engineering intensive in terms of the drawings, the CAD, the other things that come along to that, stuff that needs to be shown up and down the value stream. You might be sending this to a customer at the point of quoting, or you might be showing it to the folks on the shop floor as they manufacture the actual components. And those have implications on what kind of server network you have in terms of a file share system, and making sure that you're confirming that you can pass those files through that system efficiently. The inability to do those kinds of industry specific things can create big gaps. And if you're working on the kind of the integration platform, a lot of, as we had talked, a lot of companies are, integrated across a number of little apps and big apps. The ability to help a customer figure out how they're going to take this custom quality management app that they developed in-house back in 94 and make sure that it can still speak to their ERP data, because they don't have a way of doing anything with that app right now. That's kind of a critical piece of that. So it comes with understanding the core needs of the organization, but also those kind of funny exceptions that after you've done enough of these are no longer exceptions, because they kind of relate to those industries.
Yeah. So if you're an organization that, has a fairly complex MRP process, the material resource planning within a manufacturer, or if you're a a high volume e-commerce B2C retailer that's providing sales online. I mean, those are like different nuances I would suspect that would affect your cloud platform or your cloud setup differently. Is that true? Like you wouldn't just those wouldn't be two scenarios where you just throw them both in the cloud and you're good. There's nuances to that that you'd have to adjust the cloud to that.
For sure. If you're talking with a situation, let's use the MRP as an example, and this varies depending on the application that you've installed. But many applications allow you to stick processes over on their own server. You call it your process server. So you can split out your server architecture. So you have your primary application server, you have a secondary process server where these processes, these large processes that take up a lot of bandwidth and load, can run independently of the rest of the environment. They're speaking to the database. They're orchestrated from the application server, and that allows now that MRP might be a bear, but it is not loading on the same box that the end users are connecting. So the end users can connect and do their business without running into these performance degradations that a MRP load might be taking. Same thing, say, with a e-commerce, you can split out in many environments multiple application threads so that you have multiple threads. You have a set of user threads, so they're connecting to an application server, whereas your e-commerce platform that might be very transactionally intensive, loading a lot of sales orders, let's say, also is connecting to a separate application server. Those in conjunction are speaking to the same database. So you have the same single point of authority in that database, but the application layers that can speak to it, you can branch those out and kind of segregate them so they're not conflicting with each other from a performance standpoint.
That's really well put. I mean, one thing I love about this conversation is, first of all, when we're talking about cloud, I'm over my head. Like, I'm way out over my head right here talking about all this cloud stuff, because that's not my strength, and cloud infrastructure and architecture and all that stuff is not one of my biggest strengths. So you're conveying this in a really helpful way, but you're also unpacking a lot of these little nuances of cloud that I wasn't fully aware of or didn't fully understand until having this conversation. So that's interesting. So it's part industry. So you've got different processes, workflows, and needs that would affect how you set up cloud, and then certainly the applications too. Like when you guys do different you provide cloud solutions for multiple software solutions. So
correct.
If you're setting up Sage versus Epicor, for example, those are two different configurations, if you will, of cloud. Is that correct, or is it? It is. Is your cloud really architecture affected by it?
Totally. We have, I think, probably the biggest difference that I see between applications right now is you'll have a very standard separate SQL Server box that the application speaks to. The presence of an application server in especially in older architectures that are just starting to migrate to cloud deployments, we run into applications that have extreme fat clients that they're not even speaking through an application server. They're actually speaking directly to the database. Such a client takes up a huge footprint on a machine, so you find yourself having to spin out terminal server farms to account for that. Now, the challenge there is even on a terminal server, they can take a lot of resources, so you need to really build out those terminal servers with a lot of sockets and CPUs to handle these applications, because these fat clients tend to consume one CPU per application. So you find yourself creating really robust server farms to allow 15 or 20 users to get into that terminal server. And then as you hit kind of your natural limit, now you find yourself spinning up and you create that set of terminal servers and you integrate them as a farm so that they can speak back to the database. If that is one architecture footprint. Now, if you get to a client server application that has a web interface, that its client is purely web-based, now you may not have a terminal services layer at all. So you might have the end users and the end user terminal are communicating directly with the application server across the wires, and there's no need for a significant client deployment. And so those are some of the basic challenges. We even have customers that have kind of parallel processes as some ERPs are migrating themselves and building application server layers that allow for e-commerce to support, because really the idea of applications speaking directly to the databases is something that's I would have thought it would have already gone out of style, but it's still around with us. But as we slowly get there, I see customer or vendors creating application server layers initially for things like e-commerce to speak to those and provide an API layer so that you can provide business logic, but also to begin to migrate their client base so that the client computers are now speaking through the middleware and not through the database itself, and thinning out the client layer as a result.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So you need to, when you're assessing potential managed service providers, you need to know that they understand your industry, they understand the technology you're deploying, because those all have implications on how you set up. It's not a one size fits all, just set up a platform for them and go at it.
It certainly isn't, and this activity should be done in conjunction with functional experts of the application and its management, along with technical experts. And that's been for us as we branch out into other systems, because we get to the point where another system becomes available, another opportunity, then we find ourselves partnering with kind of a broader community to say, okay, now that we want to take on a different system, what is the right knowledge level that needs to be had to do this successfully? Because we don't want to just be the mom and pop shop that takes someone's application and throws it up in the cloud and says you're done. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is maximizing the customer value, because the idea of the cloud is that the customer is getting value out of it. And if you're not taking care to take care of those nuances, I think you're ultimately doing them a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it gets back to the point too of, of really closely and carefully evaluating your managed service providers, because again, it's not just, I think the first two that come to mind for a lot of people is AWS and Azure. Those are the two big ones, but there's a lot of other options and there's a lot of other considerations. It's not just, is it a name I recognize? Is it, you want to know that there's some targeted expertise that you need for your specific deployment.
For sure. What is what capabilities, what tier are you talking about? What level of redundancy do they offer? Every server or data center tier level comes with different expectations and requirements and service levels, and understanding what your service level expectations are relative to the provider that you have is really important, as well as knowing what their expertise level and how much expertise they can provide to help you get to where you need to be. Because if there's a gap between, say, what AWS is willing to do and where you need to go, if there's a space in there, or if there's some point in that chain between AWS and your end user, you want to make sure that you have all of those points covered along the way. Else you get a gap in the application layer or a gap at the technical services layer, you might find yourself in a bit of trouble.
Yeah. Makes sense. So I guess just to summarize, so if we back up here a second, come back up to the big picture, and we want to summarize, kind of wrap up the conversation, summarize some of the big themes of what are the big takeaways for cloud deployments. I think one is the one we just covered, which is, make sure you carefully consider your managed service provider, and that you understand you make sure that they understand your industry, your workflow, your functional needs, as well as your applications and data structure and all that technical stuff. There's also, just the understanding of what type of cloud solution are you looking for? Is it multi-tenant SaaS? Is it more of a platform as a service, infrastructure as a service? That's another nuance. What other big takeaways or big sort of closing words of advice would you give to someone who's really trying to understand the cloud better, or thinking about making that leap into the cloud? What kind of big picture takeaways would you leave us with?
Well, I think the first would be, and we've touched on this a bit, is the idea of knowledge and knowing what your options are. Because I think too often when you go into a car lot and the salesperson gives you two options between what's available, you might come to believe that I can either have a pickup truck or a minivan, and you realize that I don't like either of them on the highway. You find yourself when you're off on the road now, maybe I needed to figure out what my options really were. So really a lot of it starts with understanding what my options are, and then when you start evaluating those options, how do those map against your expectations? I think expectation management is a really important thing in terms of, if you are a company that has if you're coming from a highly customized, highly tailored software environment, and I want to jump into ERP, There's a big leap right there that you're making culturally from a system, from an out-of-the-box system to going to an out-of-the-box system from a highly customized, tailorable system. That leap is huge in itself. Understanding that, am I picking a software version that is it a huge jump, or is it something that's sort of falling in between that I can make that migration kind of partway there to a nice middle road? Because if you take a direction that's kind of the extreme, you might find kind of shock across the company of how you make that change. So understanding what those options really have in terms of their impact on the organization, I think really is the thing you have to live with after you've signed the check.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And then last question I'll ask you: what big trends do you see? What's the big trend or two you see happening in the cloud space in the next 3 or 5 years?
I think the deployment of services to browser-based clients is a really big deal. That has been something that I think has been in the works for a long time, and I've seen a lot of vendors start to get over the hump with these and be able to put out fully browser-based versions of their application that have a much better comparable offering in terms of what they offer. But not only that, a lot of legacy applications of just the last generation were all, we might say, WinForm based in terms of their construction, using at the application layer, and using more web-based protocols, more JavaScript-based protocols allows for a lot of different kind of paradigmatic shifts in terms of how data is presented to the user. So it's not just a matter of I'm moving it into a browser. It's the movement into the browser allows now for a whole different paradigm of I can get this kind of data rolled up and presented in a much more real-time way. I can more dynamically configure how my work experience is going to be. The WinForm had tended to be a very kind of structured, here's what you have to work with it. Whereas web designs, more often they build these with the assumption that I'm going to have some sort of grid or tile view that I'm going to allow you to come and plug and play what matters to you, so that when you're entering data at this point, you're looking at some indicators here that are telling you how well your factory is doing, how well your work area is doing, if exceptions are jumping up that you need to manage. And that's, the ability to be refreshing those things and keeping those in real time. That whole architecture allows, I think, for a lot of really neat tools to be deployed to the users. And they're not just neat tools. I think they have some true value to them.
Really interesting. Yeah. The web browser piece is a fascinating one too. It seems like that's where it makes sense that's where we'd be headed right now. So that's really good stuff. So real quick as we wrap up, how do people get a hold of you? What's your website address? Maybe repeat your name just so they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, Brad Feakes, Feakes. I'm on LinkedIn. My company is Estes Group, and our website is estesgrp.com.
Okay, well, thanks very much for being on the show today, Brad. Great discussion. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk a little bit more about cloud, unpack some of the things that we talked about here with Brad, and we're actually going to segue into our discussion of the top 10 enterprise technology or ERP systems for 2022, which just so happens to include many cloud providers. So we're going to talk about that when we take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 25. Thanks for listening. You can find us every Wednesday on YouTube and all the usual audio podcast platforms. And so we just had the discussion with Brad about cloud and managed services, which I don't know about you, but I learned a ton in that conversation and some of the responses he provided. What were some of your thoughts, or what are some of the things that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, that was super technical. And for someone that, like myself, that's not too familiar with the cloud, it was really helpful because I will be completely honest. I wasn't even really sure what the cloud is. Like, I understand the concept, but the way that he put it, specifically with his bumper sticker analogy, right? The cloud is actually just someone else working on your computer type of thing, helped me really understand what that meant. And I had no idea that there were so many options when it comes to not only cloud services, but just options when it comes to how you utilize and manage your data. And I think that the thing that I would kind of ask you is do you see companies a lot kind of in that hybrid space of not ready to completely go to the cloud, but like interested, cloud curious, if you will, because if, I was a business owner, just saying, here you go, to someone else with my data would be really scary. So,
Yeah, and that's the key thing is there are a lot of people that are scared, and there's still a lot of trepidation about moving to the cloud, despite the fact that cloud providers are arguably more secure, they're more stable, it's more reliable. But at the same time, as we talked about, there's also potential performance issues because now there's not that immediate physical location that can facilitate a faster performance in some cases. And certainly if you're in a remote area or you have unreliable internet connectivity, that can create difficulties as well. But setting that aside, there's a lot of perceived fear about things that aren't necessarily real. So things like cyber attacks, which are real, but you're more likely to have a breach on your within your own IT department versus a big provider that has specialists that's all they do is make sure they don't get hacked. But I think the other thing too is a couple things. There's a couple things at play that are fueling that hybrid path that he talks about. One is the lack of maturity of a lot of the cloud providers. So a lot of the big software vendors that are providing cloud solutions simply don't have the capabilities and the maturity of their product yet because they're still rewriting a lot of these programs for the cloud. So they've taken their on-premise and they're trying to replicate that functionality in the cloud, and that oftentimes requires a rewrite. So that almost by definition requires a lot of vendors, like for example, Oracle, we found this to be true. Infor is another one. Those are just two examples, and actually even SAP and to some degree Microsoft as well. Some of these big software vendors have some decent cloud capabilities, but then they've got other areas where they just aren't ready. So you end up, if you buy their solution, you end up having to have a hybrid solution. And then the other factor at play is there's just going to be certain parts of your business where you are more willing or able to defer to some of the limitations that cloud provides more from a functionality and flexibility perspective. So, in other words, especially if you're talking about a software as a service or multi-tenant model like we talked about with Brad, where you have even more limited flexibility, that's certain parts of your business are going to lend itself well to that. And there's certain parts of your business where you either can't or you don't want to adapt or just defer to what those limitations are. So that's another dynamic that sort of plays into this whole hybrid model. So I think there's just so many forces at play that are leading a lot of organizations. I don't know of many, if any, organizations that have gone 100% to the cloud yet, just because it's not feasible yet. It may be, 5 or 10 years or whatever, but right now it's not for most organizations.
Yeah. From just, a baseline understanding, if you had questions about moving to the cloud or understanding what that might look like for your organization, knowing that sometimes when you're reaching out to a cloud vendor, they go directly into sales mode, right? And they're trying to sell you. So what would be kind of your recommendation on the first step if you wanted to learn about what that might look like as an option for your organization? Who would you reach out to, or how would you start to kind of research that?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly reach out to us. I mean, Third Stage is an organization that can help navigate those decisions and help you define a roadmap to move to, or at least start moving to the cloud as part of a longer term transformation journey. That's one option. You can certainly reach out to the different cloud providers. I think the big lesson, though, is if you're going to if you're going to reach out to cloud providers, I mean, first of all, make sure you understand what it is you're looking for and what your specs are, because as we talked about with Brad, it's more than just, can you host X amount of, do you have the bandwidth to host, X volume of transaction or Y, volume of applications that we need you to host. There's a lot more to it. You got into all the stuff around infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and a lot of other stuff that you really want to think about. How does my cloud provider provide those types of services or not, and what are my priorities and what's the best option for me? So really just going through a formal evaluation, just like you would with a big ERP or HCM or CRM decision. You're probably going to go through you should be going through a big evaluation that objectively looks at all your options, and not just the big options too, by the way. It's also those smaller options, by the way, too, can provide even better solutions in some cases.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great segue into your new video that just dropped, right? The top systems of 2022, which are, some of our most popular videos, and a great kind of overview of just the system. So I'm curious, is how did the cloud-based systems, or maybe the more cloud-heavy systems, fall in your ranking? And first, maybe just explain to us, how do you rank these videos for those of us that may not know?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's a difficult ranking to do every year. I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. It gets a lot of attention and people that love the video. And that is by far our most popular video so far, was last year's top ERP systems, which had close to 200,000 views, or at least at the time we're recording this, it had close to 200,000 views. So it's a lot of fun to do, but it's difficult because there's so many variables that go into it. So what we do is we work as a team. So Third Stage has grown quite a bit since our last ranking. So we got a broader set of inputs from our team to understand what are some of the observations they're having with experience with clients evaluating, selecting, and implementing these different solutions. So we took a look at all the different systems in the marketplace, and we had a number of criteria we looked at, such as overall functionality, total cost of ownership, average ROI, the flexibility of the solutions, the availability of resources to help you implement the solution. We also have an internal database we use to help clients through the evaluation process, and we use that quantitative data, which is very objective, to compare different systems in different functional areas. So it's a lot of different data we use to arrive at a general ranking, which is cross-industry, cross-geography, and certainly any organization with specific needs is going to have a different top 10 list, if you will. But this is meant to be a very broad, generic overview. And so the cloud solutions did well. I mean, if you're just looking at the list here, there aren't any strictly on-premise systems left in our top 10 list. So, in fact, I don't even recall if last year there were any on-premise, but every provider we have in here is providing some sort of cloud option. So I would say, and in fact, I would also say that even if you're looking outside our top 10 list and you extend your search to the next 20 or 50 vendors beyond that, I would say 80-90% of them are probably going to either have cloud-only options or some sort of hybrid, or the option to go either cloud or on-premise. So the days of pure on-premise solutions, I think, are slowly dying off.
Yeah, definitely. Really shows kind of the evolution and the market share of cloud systems. And just so we understand, like if I am N4 or anything like that and reach out to you and say, I want to be on your top 10 list, then what do you do? Do you evaluate them more heavily, or this is just completely independent to Third Stage? Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, great point. Being the marketing person you are, you hit a very important point that I missed, which is this is 100% technology agnostic. It's an independent ranking. There is no vendor influence over how we rank these. And so, to answer your question, we do often get vendors that reach out and say, "Hey, how can we do better on your list?" In fact, I just got even before this video dropped, I just got last week 2 or 3 emails from different vendors saying, "Hey, we saw that we landed number whatever on your list. We think we should be higher." And then another one who I'd never heard of said, "I think we should be in your top 10 list." And I had never heard of the provider, so chances are they won't be in the top 10 anytime soon. But so there's these big vendors have whole departments dedicated to what they call. Influencing selection consultants, or influencing other industry players, and we don't just ignore them and not talk to them. We certainly want to learn about their products, make sure we understand the roadmap and stuff. But their whole job is to try and influence people like us to try and show that they're the best thing since sliced bread, which we try our best not to succumb to.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you for explaining that. And so for the cloud, I know you had mentioned one of your data points is cost. On your list, are the cloud systems, do they tend to be the more expensive ones, or what does that look like as far as budgeting?
Well, I would say that I have a pretty strong opinion on this, and the opinion isn't just what I think or what I want to believe. It's based on data that we see from actual clients, and that is that cloud systems are generally, for the most part, not cheaper than on-premise. And I have a feeling that just about every cloud vendor listening to this right now is going to strongly disagree, and they're going to put comments below saying I'm full of it, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But it is absolutely true. It is pure sales spin when they say that you're going to save money in the cloud. You do not save money. Yes, you're going to save money on not having to have an infrastructure. So you might not have as many servers, or you might not need as much IT staff to support it. But guess what? You're going to pay the vendor more to do that for you. So, yep, you're saving money over here, but you're shifting money over here. And now you've just increased your annual spend with this one vendor or whatever vendors you might be using. And you're just shifting the cost from one place to another. It's a lot like, in some ways, it's like leasing versus buying a car, where, you buy a car. Yes, you have this big upfront cost, but then longer term, at least for a certain amount of time, you have a lower cost just for maintenance and gas and stuff like that. But when you lease a car, you have a higher payment that never really goes away unless you get rid of the car. And so that's a lot like the cloud. You're going to pay more per year, and that is never going to go away. So after 5 or 7 years, we found that to be about the break even, where the good news is you're not paying as much money right up front in year one with cloud, but you're paying it long term. So after 5 or 7 years, generally that tends to be where the threshold is to where you're actually paying more. Now, you could argue that you're going to get more value out of that added cost. So sure, maybe you pay more for that cloud solution and you get some sort of benefit in terms of better functionality, constant upgrades and updates to your software, so you always have the newest and greatest. But that's not saving money. So when a cloud provider tells you you're going to save money and to budget less, you just don't believe it, because it's rarely true. I don't know that I couldn't give you a specific example right now of a case where a client actually, in reality, saved money. I see vendors try to put together business cases that have some hocus pocus numbers that try to suggest that you're going to save money, but generally that doesn't materialize.
Gotcha. Wow, that's really interesting and super important to know as a company, right? I wonder if there's like a dark horse on your list that got on there because of their cloud solution, or one that you were like, I don't know if I would have put them on there if they didn't have an innovative option when it comes to cloud or something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a dark horse that is on here because of their cloud solutions specifically. In fact, I would say that the cloud solutions for many of these vendors are actually holding them back from being rated higher. In that, it isn't because they're in the cloud. It has nothing to do with whether or not we think the cloud's viable or not. It's more what I was talking about before, where the solutions just aren't as developed for the cloud yet. In 5 years, this will probably be an obsolete comment, and we won't even be having this conversation. But where we are right now, with the solutions where they are right now, a lot of these cloud solutions, like if you look at in the big vendors, for example, like SAP S/4HANA, moved up a little bit. They moved, I think they were number 6 last year, and they moved up to number 4 this year. And I think the biggest thing holding back S/4HANA is the fact that there's so much that they just haven't fixed yet or baked yet in terms of or baked into the functionality. Same with the Oracle ERP Cloud, which is one ranking higher, which is number 3. That did move up slightly because they are addressing those issues, but they're still not where they need to be. And if you're a legacy SAP or Oracle customer that is using one of the old on-premise systems and now you're looking to go to the cloud, you just have to recognize you are probably going to take a step back in the short term for functionality, and that's what kind of keeps them lower. But then on the other side, you have Oracle NetSuite. I'm not going to tell you who's number 2 versus number 1 because it's pretty interesting. But the top 2, I'll just tell you who the top 2 are. It's Oracle NetSuite, Microsoft D365 round out the top 4 from the ones I just mentioned. And Oracle NetSuite is the only one in that top 4. In fact, it's only one of 2 providers in the entire top 10 that is a pure cloud solution, where that's all they do is cloud. In fact, they're multi-tenant cloud, so they're SaaS. And so, but the difference with NetSuite is they've always been in the cloud. So their whole solution has been built for the cloud. It's not like they're playing catch up. They've been doing this for 20 years. So whether or not it's the right functionality for you is a different story, but the general functionality they have is pretty well developed. And then same with, D365 is still making that shift to the cloud as well. But I think they're a little bit further along than SAP and Oracle in terms of bringing those capabilities to the cloud.
Right. And when you talk about those multi-tenant and SaaS solutions, I know so much of our audience and a lot of third stage clients are international. Did that at all affect kind of your decision making when it came to the rankings of these systems?
It did, yeah. In fact, we tried a bit harder to include the multinational view this year. Last year we started to, and we had some more broader international players. I mean, certainly, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, that's sort of a universal solution set that isn't, prevalent in most countries. But you have some solutions like, for example, two that stand out here are IFS and Odoo. And those are both European-based companies, but it's not just that they're based in Europe. It's just that it's just that they don't have a global footprint yet, or as broad of a global footprint as some of the other providers. But in the regions where they're strong, they're really strong, and they're really well. They have really good market penetration, and they have good adoption and that sort of thing. So Odoo and IFS are probably the two, most, call it, internationally based vendors.
Excellent. Well, so are you seriously not going to tell us what number one is, even if I give you like a drum roll?
I could. How about this? I'll tell you, it's not the same as last year's number one. There's a.
Oh wow! Okay, that's a big shift.
Yeah, there's a shift, and then there's what I'll tell you too is that two products fell out of our top 10. So last year we had Workday and ServiceNow had both been in our top 10. They both fell out of the top 10. The reason ServiceNow did is just because it never really was a full, complete ERP system. I mean, people try to use it as an ERP system, and there's just other emerging ERP systems that overtook ServiceNow. Workday, same thing, although they are a little bit they're becoming more of a true ERP system. They started off as an HCM system at its core, but they're starting to add financials and other sorts of ERP-esque types of capabilities. But the reason they fell out is because of a pattern of implementation problems that we're seeing in the industry. There's been more lawsuits and failures involving the product. So that was a sort of a ding against them that dropped them down. So those two dropped out of the top 10. And then the new entrants into the top 10 were Acumatica, which is very strong in the manufacturing and distribution space. They're sort of an up-and-coming vendor that we've just seen a lot of clients that really like the product. And the other one, what was the other one? Oh, Odoo. Odoo is the other one that wasn't in the top 10 last year. It's an open source solution. It's sort of a non-traditional solution that's not as well known, but it was in our top 10 for small businesses last year. But this year we've seen the adoption rate globally pick up enough, and the general functionality and just the customer satisfaction with the product has increased enough to kind of bump it into the top 10. So I can share those two changes there. I'll tell you the top three and 4 actually just shifted around quite a bit. And then the others just sort of, they weren't stable. There's a little bit of movement in the bottom 5 as well. So
well, I know I myself and our audience are excited to check out that video, most certainly. And then you usually do, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you'll be doing some industry specific, business size, those types of things. Will you do a cloud specific top 10 list?
I don't know. I mean, and the reason I hesitate is just because a cloud is almost becoming a irrelevant word in that,
right. Yeah.
So many of these solutions are just are cloud. And so if I were to do, like, for example, if I were just to choose the best cloud solutions, I suppose I could look at, exclude the ones that are more hybrid, like the Oracles of the world, or the, what's the other one? Like the Infor of the world, where they have kind of some cloud, some on-prem still. If I did that, sure, then this top 10 would look a bit different. So we could do that, but the ones I know we'll do in the shorter term would be top 10 ERP systems for small business, top 10 for manufacturing distribution, and also top 10 CRM and HCM systems. Those are kind of that rounds out our most popular series and the ones that people seem to be craving the most. So we may get to cloud, but we'll have to see. I mean, you're the marketing person; you might have to tell me if you if you disagree or think otherwise in our
I think we should let our audience tell us. If you want to see that video, please let us know. And if you have any interest or specific questions, we'd love to hear from you. But thank you, Eric, for taking us through that list. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about it. And Eric always puts his email on all of our information when we do publish via podcasts or on YouTube. So please feel free to reach out to him directly. He's very hands-on when it comes to answering these. So, and we have a lot of cloud experts on our team too, even cloud experts in specific industries, those types of things. So please feel free to reach out. But I learned a ton today. I don't know that we've had a ground control episode where I learned so much from Brad and you and team. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. And that's what we're trying to do, by the way. I'm trying to step up our game to where, if I'm learning a lot or if I'm bringing on a guest that I want to know more from or know more about, I figure that's a good litmus test that the rest of the audience may agree with that. In fact, next week, on next week's show, we are going to have the authors of a book that I just happen to have sitting right here. That maybe I'll give a little teaser of who this is going to be. But they're two authors that have just put out a book called Building a Digital Future, and I think that's coming up backwards on my screen there. But it's Lippy Sarkar and Vinny Banzel who put together a book called Building a Digital Future, and it's a fascinating book because it's actually focused on Microsoft D365, but the content in here it's transferable to really any sort of digital transformation. So I'm excited to have those two guests on the show just to talk about the book a little bit more and talk about some of their findings in there as they're writing.
Absolutely.
So that's just another example. Yeah. So there's some great guests throughout the upcoming episodes, and again every Wednesday you find new episodes here on YouTube and all the audio podcast platforms. So So thanks for everyone for listening, and thanks for being here today, Kyler. Look forward to next week's episode. Hope you have a great day in the meantime, and we will see you next time on Transformation Ground Control.